guys, this is week 2 of the vlog, and this time I'm going to tell you all about Robyn's first month. And when we first went in, she had a cover over her incubator, and they do that to keep it nice and dark and calm for them. It reminds them of being inside the womb, because obviously they're all curled up and snug in there with not much light. So when I lifted the side up, there were lots of tubes and wires in various places, and it was all quite daunting to begin with, but it was soon explained what all the wires were for and what the tubes were for and what each one was doing to help Robyn. So she was really small, and one of her eyes was opening for very short periods of time, and she would look around towards where she could hear sounds coming from. And the other one was still fused shut. Now, they fuse shut inside the womb, and they say that they stay closed until about 27 weeks. So because she was born at 25 weeks, one of them had opened, but the other one was still fused shut, so we didn't get a glimpse of that one on the first day. So she was really red. You could see all the veins through her skin, and that's because she hadn't been in long enough to put on the fat that babies put on in the 3rd trimester, so I didn't even reach the 3rd trimester. After 24 hours, she was extubated. Now that is when they take the breathing tube out of her mouth, and they put her onto a machine called CPAP, which stands for Continuous Positive Airway Pressure. So that just keeps a bit of air going into the lungs so that when she breathes out, her lungs don't collapse. With the CPAP machine, she has a white helmet on, and there's a bit of Velcro at the top that holds the oxygen and air tubes in place. She's also got a mask on, and that puts the air into her nose, and she's also got a blue chin strap which is around her head. Now that's to try and keep her mouth closed, because otherwise the air that's going in through her nose just escapes out of her mouth and doesn't actually go into her lungs. So that's what that's for. She was also put under a blue light on that first day, and that was to break down some of the enzymes in the skin because she had a bit of jaundice. So the goggles are to protect her eyes from that because the lights are quite bright. So she was on CPAP for a few days before she started to struggle. So the doctors changed the settings on that, and they changed it to IMV, which stands for intermittent ventilation. So that gives her some help in the form of extra breaths. She's still breathing by herself, but it just puts some extra breaths in there to help her along when she forgets to do it for herself. She had a few desaturations, which are also known as desats, and they are when the baby stops breathing. So it's called an apnea, and that is just like sleep apnea that adults get, where you're in a really deep sleep and you stop breathing. Your brain just forgets that you have to do it. So she had an apnea, and then that made her blood oxygen level low because she wasn't breathing in. So in turn, her heart rate went down. Now it's really scary when you see that for the first time as a parent, because you're just sitting there thinking her heart rate's going down, you see all the numbers dropping on the monitor, you see the red lights flashing on there, and you just think, there's nothing I can do, I don't know what to do, and you panic a little bit. But all the nurses were really good, and they just come over calmly and give her a bit of a rub on the back, just as some stimulation to try and kick her into thinking, oh wait, no, I need to breathe. I'm not breathing, I need to breathe now. So you see the numbers slowly coming back up on the monitor, and you just think, oh, thank goodness. But it's really amazing. They're all so good at their jobs, and they're all so calm as well. So at 1 week old, Robyn needed a new incubator, and they changed them over every week, just to make sure that everything's still clean and hygienic and sterile. And at that point, we got to hold her for the first time. So we had her all wrapped up in a blanket, and she's nice and warm and cosy in there. You can see more of the tubes than of her. It was really amazing to hold her for the first time, and we'd waited a week, and throughout that week we'd just been looking at her through plastic and putting our hands into the little holes that are on both sides. So it was really, really, really good to just be able to hold her, and we spoke to her, and I had a little sing to her, and she was making these little squeaky noises, which was like, yeah, Mum, I'm listening. She was looking around a lot during that, especially in the direction of our voices, so that was kind of an indicator that she recognised mine and James's voice, which was really, really nice. So the mask for the CPAP machine was starting to indent the bridge of her nose a little bit, so they switched over to some prongs that went directly up her nose, just so that it wasn't resting on the bridge of her nose anymore, because if it's kept on there for too long, the skin can start to break down, and if it does that, it becomes an infection risk because it's sort of like an open wound. So they said that they were going to alternate between the mask and the prongs, just so that it didn't do any more damage. And she went from IMV back onto CPAP, which was a step in the right direction. So that was back onto just the pressure for her lungs rather than the extra breaths being given. But the next day she had to go back onto IMV because her blood oxygen was too low and she'd had quite a lot of DSATs. Also that day she had a cannula put in her hand for a blood transfusion. She was too small to replace her own blood, so all the tests that she'd been having blood taken for, she needed that blood to be replaced because she wasn't making it for herself like we do as adults. She's just too small to be able to do that yet. And for that blood transfusion, I had to sign a consent form. So the day after that, she had to go back onto the full ventilator, so that was back onto the tube that she had when she was first born. It did feel like a little bit of a step back, but at the same time it was quite nice to be able to see her face because she didn't have the mask and the hat on, so it was nice to have a little stroke of the hair that she had and just be able to see her features a bit more. And the reason she had to go back onto the full ventilator was just because she was so tiny, so premature, that she was starting to struggle and get tired for having to breathe for herself. So alongside all of that with the ventilator, she had heart scans and brain scans, and those are routine for premature babies, just to check that everything's in the right place and doing what it should be doing. From the heart scan, it had shown that she had PDA, and that is a little duct that in normal full-term newborns, it's either already closed or it closes within a few hours of being born. It's quite often open in premature babies, so it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. And they treated that with 3 doses of ibuprofen given over 3 days in the hope that the ibuprofen would shrink the duct and finally close it. After 3 days, they did a rescan on her heart and they could see that it was still open, so they did another 3 days of ibuprofen. At 2 weeks old, we registered her birth, so she was officially a real human. Yay! And the day after that, quite a lot actually happened. She was being weaned down on the ventilator, so with the hope that she'd be back onto CPAP the next day. She'd finished all of her antibiotics, and that was from the infection that started off the labour. She'd had another heart scan and her duct was still there, but it had improved since the last scan, which they were really, really happy with. And they were also beginning to increase her milk intake. Now, I had been expressing milk for her, so she was having my milk alongside TPN, which is an intravenous artificial feed that goes in through the cannula that she had in her hand. And they increased my milk from 0.7 mils to 1.5 mils every 2 hours, and then they planned from there to increase it by 0.8 mils every 24 hours. That milk that I express is fed to her through a tube which goes directly down into her stomach. So the next day she was extubated again and put back onto CPAP, which was a really good step forwards after she'd taken that one backwards. So we were really, really happy about that. And we were also being encouraged to help where we could with her cares. So obviously we can't do any of the medical stuff, so sometimes you do feel a little bit helpless, but we were being encouraged to change her nappies, which we've done quite a few of now. We hold the syringe while she's being fed the milk through the tube, and we read to her every day. If you read to them, especially in a rhythm, so anything that rhymes and has a dun, 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 it's really good for their brain pathways, and it also gets them used to your voices as well. And the other thing that we're encouraged to do is kangaroo care. I love kangaroo care. It's basically cuddles, but they get slotted down inside your top, so it's skin to skin, and that encourages so many things. It's got so many benefits. Just a couple of them are it regulates their temperature, it regulates their heart rate, and it's also really good bonding time for both you and the baby. So you get that time together that we didn't get when she was first born because she needed to be taken off and stabilised. So the first time we did that, it really felt like the moment that we should have had when she was born. It was amazing. So throughout her first month, she's been consistently gaining weight, which is great. She was 700 grams when she was born, and that was £1 8 ounces. And now she is 1,022 grams, which is £2 4 ounces. So she has put on a bit, and it's really good. So where are we now? After a month, she is off her artificial feeds altogether, and she now just has my milk. She has 14 mils every 2 hours, every day. And the pressure on her CPAP is being lowered slowly. She's now on a different CPAP machine, but she still has the mask and the helmet. It's called a CPAP bubble machine, and the pressures on it are just slightly lower. So she's slowly being weaned down off that, and then she'll go on to the next stage of that as well. She's having lots of cuddles, which is great for me as well, because I love that. And she's generally doing really well. So next week I'm planning to do an update on how Robyn's getting on, and also what it's like to be a NICU parent.